We're now on Daf Lamed Gimel Amid Beis, and we're trying to understand why Reish Lakish and his principle of Ein Ma'virin al Mitzvahs will explain the halacha of Abaye that the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi comes before the Hatovas HaNeros. Says the Gemara, V'chi ayol lehechal, as soon as he enters into the Hechal, going from east to west, is b'mizbeach paga b'reisha. The mizbeach was situated right there, close to the very entrance to the Hechal, and we're going to have to prove that, and therefore the shulchan and the menorah will come later. First is going to be the mizbeach, and mitzvah boliyotcha is ein ma'virin ala mitzvahs. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa, but shulchan b'tzafon. In the northern part of the Heichal, there was a shulchan. Moshuch min hakosel shtei amos u'mechza. It was distance from the northern wall of the Heichal by 2.5 amos. Where was the menorah? The menorah was Badoron, on the south side of the Heichal, and again, Mitzucha ben HaKotzel Shtei Amos u'Mechza. Mizbeach, and where was the Mizbeach? Mimutza. The Omed Ba'emtza. It was actually midway, equidistant between the Shulchan on the north and the menorah on the south. Umashuch klape chutz, and it was a little bit tilted towards the outside of the Heichal, meaning towards the entranceway into the Heichal. Gimor, a small amount. So in any event, since the Mizbeach was inclined towards the outside of the Heichal, it means that as soon as he entered into the Heichal, the first thing that he encountered was the Mizbeach. And therefore we apply the principle of Ein Ma'virin al HaMitzvahs. If you would have time for a more in-depth shir, I once gave a shir on this concept of Ein Ma'virin al HaMitzvahs. It's uploaded onto YU Torah. I can send you even a link. But that's only if you have the time. The Gemara asks a kasha, as far as the exact location of the Mizbeach HaPnimi, bin Nukme, why did they set up the Mizbeach lehadaihu exactly parallel to the Shulchan on one side and the menorah on the other side? Why did they locate the Mizbeach Moshuch klape chutz? And where answers came in the Chsiv, it says in the Pasuk, in Parshas Shum, it says, V'yes ha-menorah nochach ha-shulchan, is what do we learn from that pasuk? De be'inon de chazu ahadodi. It should be nothing blocking between the menorah and the shulchan. In other words, if there's open space, a direct line, without any interferences between the menorah and the shulchan, that's called nochach. And therefore, if the Mizbeach would be situated exactly midway between the shulchan and the menorah, then we would have no kiyum of the pasuk nochach. So therefore, they would moshech the Mizbeach a little bit towards the outer part, meaning outer part of the Heichal, if you're standing in the Heichal, or the inner part of the Heichal as soon as you enter in from the outside, so that the tzad shulchan and the menorah were towards the west, they would see each other, and the Mizbeach was closer to the east, meaning the entrance into the Heichal. Omar Rav Shema Mina, Mida Reish Lakish, that's derived from Reish Lakish, that Abure Dera Atotefta, meaning, if you have placed your tefillin on your arm, now you're ready for the tefillin shel rosh, And where did you place the tefillin shel yad? On the totefta. And that's al azroa. Is therefore, we're going to apply the principle of Reish Lakish of ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. Now, why is that? And the Gemara answers, Hechi Ovid, what should he do? Midra'a litotefta. He should make sure to put on his tefillin shel yad before his tefillin shel rosh. Meaning, if not for Reish Lakish's principle of ein mavir ala mitzvahs, then the logic would be compelling to put on the tefillin shel rosh first. But now that we have Reish Lakish, then we're involved, if we put on the tefillin shel rosh first, in a violation of the principle of ein mavirin al hamitzvahs. Now let me just read to you the note. He says the following. By bypassing the arm, meaning the shel yad, for the head, for the shel rosh, that we're not allowed to do, because when a person's hand reaches the opposite arm, so let's say he's a righty, he is putting on the tefillin with his right hand onto his left hand. And if you would draw a straight line from the head, then it reaches the head. So therefore, one should not delay donning the arm tefillin on account of the head tefillin. Notice the head tefillin has the greatest sanctity, but before he gets to the head, he has the arm. And therefore, he should first put on his tefillin on his arm and only afterwards put him on his head. Because if he put him on his head first, he would be passing over his arm, where he's chayav to put on the tefillin shel yad, and that would be a violation of the principle of ein ovin ala mitzvahs. Now we go back to Abaye. Vatovas chamesh neros kodem l'damat tamid. As we said before, according to Abba Shol, and Abaye accepted Abba Shol, the mafsik between the beginning of that tova, the 5, and the end of that tova, the 2, is going to be the damat tamid. And damat tamid kodem latova shtei neros. My timer. Why do we juggle or wedge the damat tamid in the middle of the hatovas haneros? So Abaye, hahu, with regard to the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, it says baboker, baboker. So what does that mean? That these Gizrei Eitzim have to be in the morning, and when it says baboker, baboker twice, it indicates that it should be early in the morning. Delo tzriche. We don't need a pasuk here to tell me that the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim has to be first. And the reason why that's compelling logically is because we are preparing the Mizbeach, and that's called a Machshir. You know, we need to be Machshir the Mizbeach for the Avodas HaKarbonos, for the Haktoras, Torres. So therefore, this double language of Baboker is totally redundant. And we're going to apply the principle now of Vim'eno Inyan. If it's not relevant in its place, then we'll use it elsewhere. Shadinu, we're going to apply it lahacha with regard to the dam, to the avodas dam hatom. And therefore, chad shadye latovas chamesh neros, dilakadme ladam hatom, v'chad shadye ladam hatomid, dinakadme latovas shtei neros. it means that we're going to use one baboker to teach me that he's got to begin the process of Atovas HaNeros even before he gets to the Damat Tomid. Because in the Damat Tomid, it doesn't say baboker twice. The Chad, however, there is one baboker with regard to the Damat Tomid, and that's going to teach us that it should come before the completion of Latovas HaNeros, which means the Kadme Latovas Shtei Neros. So Abai says the following. Chad l'shadye latovas chamesh neros v'lekadme l'damat tomid. In the case of one of the words baboker, which we're borrowing from the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim and we're applying it to the neros, so that's going to generate a chiyuv of hatovas chamesh neros, and the baboker means it's going to come before the dam of the tomid. And the reason for that is the hacha plusa vehacha tre. With regard to the hatovas haneros, we actually have three babokers. Why? Because there's one pasuk baboker that's written in the parsha of hatovas haneros, and we're going to borrow baboker from Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. So all told, when we throw it into the cholent, it says baboker beitivos haneros. That's two, and then we have a borrowed baboker from Shnei Gizrei Eitzim that jacks it up to three. With regard to the Talmud, we have esakeves echad taseh baboker, and we have one baboker over here. I mean, the truth is that. It says hacha trei. Just 1 second. Hacha trei. He doesn't tell you trei here in the Masifta. Just 1 second. Hacha trei. Let's see if here he has something. Oh, I see. We have the extra baboker in the parsha of Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. In the parsha of Neros, we have three babokers. We have baboker beitivo es haneros, and then we're going to apply the principle of Eino Inyan, and we'll borrow one baboker from the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. In the case of the Talmud, it only says es hakeves echad taseh baboker once. We'll borrow the second baboker of Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, and we jack it up to number 2. It's therefore chad shadeh l'dama Talmud. We're going to take one baboker borrow it from Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, and the lekadme latovas shtei neros. In other words, we want to make sure that we can fulfill 2 hakdamos over here, 2 kedimos. So we're going to have one kedima that we borrow from Shnei Gizrei Eitzim baboker, and that's going to tell me that hatovas chamesh neros comes before the Talmud. But we're going to take the second baboker of the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. We're going to borrow it for the Damat Talmud to teach me that the Damat Talmud has to come earlier. But you just derive the conclusion that Hatovas HaNeros comes earlier. So how do you fulfill this halacha that the Damat Talmud should come earlier? And the answer is we're going to divide up the Hatovas HaNeros into 2 segments. There's going to be 5, then we'll have the Damat Talmud, and then we'll have the last 2. Afal gav the hacha trei ve'hacha trei. When we get to the second set of neros, that means the last 2 neros, the hatov of which it has only one baboker, And in the case of Damatomid, we also have one Baboker. So if you're going to add another Baboker from Gizrei Eitzim, add it to both the to both the Hatovas Haneros and the Talmud. So how do you know that with regard to the Hatovas Shtei Neros, the Talmud should come first? We're all on the same level of tray of two Babokers. And the Gemara answers Mechaper Od, because the menorah, with all due respect, does not have the power of Kapara. It's not a Mechaper. Whereas the Talmud is the great Mechaper for Klal Yisrael. Perhaps we should use one of the Babokers, which we're borrowing from the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. Let's apply it to the case of Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi. Dilakadme L'Dam HaTamid. And that's going to teach us that the Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi, which should take place before the Dam HaTamid, which in fact it does, but we have to derive from somewhere. And we're going to derive it from the extra Babokin. The Hacha Tlasa, regard to the what we call the Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi, we're going to have three Babokers. For Hacha Trey, with regard to the Dam HaTamid, we have two. Now, why is that so? Because in Shmos Perek Chaf, Pasuk Zayin, the Torah mentions Baboker twice. And that's a reference to the Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi. Now, Hacha Trey, with regard to the Dam HaTamid, we only have two Babokers. As we saw before, we have one Baboker in the Parsha of the Tamid, and another Baboker which we borrow from the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. So therefore, we understand very well that Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi has to come before the Dam HaTamid. V'chad Shadia L'Dam HaTamid. But nevertheless, we do have an extra Baboker in the case of the Tamid. Is the Nikdom Latovas Chamesh Neros. So that we should learn from that Kedima of the Hatova 5 Neros. Even though, with regard to the Hatova Neros, we have Trey, so why therefore do you begin with the Dam HaTamid? And we're going to give the same answer that we gave before, that the menorah does not generate kapara, whereas the Dam HaTamid does, and mechaper is odif. In Cain, the Gemara says, "Afsuke b'mayim ifsakas lahu." No, it's if you're telling me that the Dam HaTamid should come earlier, and we're going to move it ahead of the Hatovas Haneros, then Afsuke b'mayim mafsaklu. How will you separate the Hatovas Haneros into two parts of 5 and 2? What are you going to tell me? That we don't really have to set up a mafsik between the 5 and the 2. Why? Because Hanichal Reish Lakish Diamar Lama Metivim V'Chozim Metivim. Why do we split the Hatovas Haneros into 2? Kidei Lahargish Kol Azara Kulo. We just want to get everyone involved, make a tumult in the Chotzer, in the in the Azara. Is Shapir. Then we understand that we want to wait with the last 2 Neros after the cleaning of the first 5 Neros, and then by extending the entire period, we get a whole excitement going on in the Azara. El Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says the Yoma Boker, Chilku l'shnei bekarim. Yeah, when the pasuk says Boker, with regard to cleaning the menorah, is Boker, says Rabbi Yochanan, tells me that we have to have, in a sense, Chilku l'shnei bekarim, meaning take that Tovas Haneros and split it into Kaviyachal 2 days, 2 mornings, which means we have to split the Tovas Haneros into 2 parts during the course of the morning, 5 Neros, and then the other 2 Neros. Is then Ma'ikal Meimar. In other words, you've got to have some sort of an avoda between the first 5 and the last 2. And you can't say that the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi is supposed to take place and implemented between the 2 cleanings of the 5 and the 2, because the Kohen can't pass the Mizbeach to perform the mitzvah of cleaning the menorah because of Ein Mavirin Ala Mitzvahs. So now it comes out, let's just summarize, that both Abaye and Rav Papa are basically coming from the same beginning, meaning they start their explanations of the Avoda and the sequence of the Avoda based on the fact that we have 2 mentions of Baboker that are redundant in the parsha of Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. Amalei Ravina Rav Ashi, Hai Baboker the Eitzim Miyater. The entire premise of both Abaye and Rav Papa is that there's a redundancy here. It's absolutely not necessary to say Baboker with regard to the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. Hami Boile Legufe, I need it for the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. Dika Omar Rachmana, because the Torah says Nikdemu Lemarocha Shniya Shel Ktores, that the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim on top of the Marocha should come before the second Marocha for the purpose of the Ktores. So therefore, we need the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim Baboker Legufe. And that's going to teach me that the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim comes before the Seder Marocha Shniya. Amalei, so Rav Ashi turns to Ravina and he answers, V'lav mi okimna. Isn't it true that we established the exact opposite? It says with regard to Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, Oleha velo al chaverta, that these 2 blocks of wood should be burnt. Oleha means the Marocha Gdola, but not on the Marocha Ketana, Michlal de Isa lechaverta, implying that the what's called the Marocha Shniya exists, and yet we place the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim on the Marocha Gdola. So when it says Baboker, we don't need the extra Baboker to teach me this halacha. We can derive it from the fact that the Torah says Olel and Olech v'lo al Chavert. Gemara asks my Shna, the Ovid Atovas Chamesh Neres Bereisha. Okay, we have to split that Atovas Neres into 2 parts, but why 5 and 2? Now that Atovas Shtei Neres Bereisha, you might as well start, if it's 5 and 2, start with the 2 and then postpone the 5. And the Gemara answers came on the Askel Behu Ovid Ruba. Once he's already beginning the mitzvah, the avoda of Atovas Shtei Neres, he should begin with Rov. But wait a second, Rov of 7 would be 4 and 3. V'navid shis. Why doesn't he light 6? It says neros in the plural. Ein neros pchusos mishtayim. So this avoda on the neros requires at least 2 neros, and if you're going to do it 6 and 1, then it doesn't qualify. Hatovesh de neros kodemes le kitores. From whence do we derive that the Torres, this Abashol, is postponed to after he completes the Atovas HaNeros, the Omakra Beitivo Es HaNeros. First, it says in the Pasuk that he should clean up the Neros. The Hadar, and then afterwards, Yaktirena, then he should burn it, meaning the Torres. Uktores leivorin. Abai says that first you bring the Ktores and then they vorin. Isanya, we learned in a brisa, Yukdam dover shenemer bo baboker baboker, lidover shelo nemer bo el baboker echad bilvad. So with regard to the Ktores, it says baboker twice. And with regard to the Tamid, it says only once, baboker. So therefore, we have to do something to give kedima to the Ktores, and that's with regard to the Avor. The Ktores has to come before Avorim. Next, we have Avorim L'Mincha, and that makes sense. The Sanyo Minayin Shalo Dover Kodem L'Tomid Shel Shachar. First, he should be makted the Avorim the Tomid Shel Shachar. Nothing should come before that. And the answer is Talmud Lomar v'orach oleha ha'ola. With regard to the Talmud, which is an ola, the Torah says v'orach oleha. He should arrange the ola on it, upon it. The Amar Rava is explaining this brisa ha'ola. When the pasuk says ha'ola, v'orach oleha ha'ola, and the Torah added a hey, is he ola rishona. That's a reference to the ola that's offered up first, which is none other than the Tomid Shel Shachar. And therefore the Avorim, which is part of the ola, of ha'ola, should be burnt on the Mizbeach before the Mincha, because ha'ola refers to the burning of Taktoras ha'evarim and not to the Mincha. Okay, then, so now we're on the top of Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, which is tomorrow's Daf. So, B'li Neder, I'm hoping that I will be able to find the time to record Daf Lamed Daled, and then in Mitzvah Shem on Yom Rishon, which is Erev Chag, we'll do Daf Lamed Hey. Let me wish you a Shabbat Shalom and get a refuah shlema for all the psuim.